When I experience my life as a small manifestation of repeating mythic motifs, I take things less personally. I feel like I'm participating in something beyond myself. I see past the threshold guardians of fear and desire and into the charmed garden, a mythic metaphor for the mystery, the unknown and unknowable source of beauty from which the cosmos and I arise. Following myth into the mystery is one way I can practice enchantment. Those are the words of Joanna Gardner in her new book, The Practice of Enchantment. Hello, and welcome to our very first MythLit webinar of 2025, hosted by the Fates and Graces as a space for the myth community to read together and celebrate the field of mythological studies and literature. My name is Stephanie Zachelski, and today I am thrilled to host our very own Joanna Gardner. What a treat this is to discuss her new book, The Practice of Enchantment. As many of you know, Joanna was the spark of inspiration behind the creation of the Mythologium, a conference for mythologists, and her work in myth spans from teaching to writing to hosting webinars just like this one to help support the work of mythological studies in the world. And today, we get to hear more about her unique ability to find enchantment in the spaces we least expect it. So to begin, I would love to invite Joanna to take the virtual microphone and to give us a few words of greeting before we start our discussion. Joanna?
Thank you so much, Steph, and thank you for leading this webinar with such grace, as you always do. And thank you for helping to bring this book into the world. Stephanie not only handled all of the operations issues in creating this book at the Joseph Campbell Foundation, but she also handled some operations support of the soul, I would say for me. For example, one day when I was hyperventilating over the introduction essay, and she was like, "It's okay. Let me look at it. It's okay." And we got through it. So let's hear it in the chat for Stephanie and everything she does for the myth community as well. And before we get started, I'd just like to invite you to take a moment and think about any area of your life that could maybe benefit from a transfusion of enchantment, right? Just bring it into your awareness. Maybe jot it down somewhere if you like, and then set it aside. Because my hope for you today is that by the end of our time together, you might have some new ideas for how that enchantment transfusion might happen for you. And so with that, Steph, I'll hand the virtual mic back to you.
Thanks, Joanna. And thank you for the kind words. It was an honor. Okay, so we will dive more into the book and the practice of enchantment in just a minute. But first, let's get the conversation going in the chat. So we want to start with a quick chat check-in. And if you haven't already, open up that chat box. It's on the bottom of your screen is the button. Tell us where you're joining in from. And when we say the word enchantment, we'll be saying it over and over again today. So when we say enchantment, what words come to mind for you? And so while y'all are sharing in the chat, I am going to get things started. I'm joining in today from North Texas. We have a cold front headed towards us right now, so that's exciting. And when I hear the word enchantment, I think of the freedom of imagination, of ideas and thoughts that are not required to be tethered to a prescribed reality. So for me, enchantment's the ability to see beyond what is before me, or perhaps even expand upon the images before my eyes to let my imagination play. So Joanna, I know you have a lot of thoughts about enchantment, but what comes to mind for you in this moment?
I just first want to mirror what you just said, seeing beyond. And then what was it? Acting upon, seeing beyond, and then something
Expanding,
expanding
like
upon,
my
seeing
image.
beyond and expanding upon. I love that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I have many thoughts about enchantment. We'll be talking about that. Keywords for me that come up are interest, wonder, fun, fascination. And I'll take a look at the chat and see what people are sharing. Would love to bring some of the voices of the community into this space. I see Vicky shares enchantment means something from nothing. That's very cool, Vicky. Andy, enchantment is iterative engagement with the surprise and delight of existence. Thank you, Andy. Ray says enchantment is what happens in the lucid dreams of late sleep cycle in the early morning. Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's do one more. I see Maggie. Enchantment raises ideas of magic and miracles. Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. And keep sharing in the chat. We love to have a nice lively chat in every MythLit webinar. So Steph, back to you.
Oh my goodness, that's great. Way to kick this off. This is wonderful. An enchanted new year. Here we are.
It
So
begins.
it begins. So yeah, now I'm gonna like Joanna, you're gonna share some slides with us, right? To tell us a bit more
Yes.
about the book. And then we're gonna segue into our yes hands session with Joanna.
Yes, I'm going to share some slides and then I'll do a little bit of a reading and then we'll go into the yes and. So here's where I negotiate with the trickster and do my slide sharing. And let's see if this works. How are we doing? Do
Looks
we have
great.
slide share?
We do. We
Okay,
do.
great. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, just a little bit about the book. It's an actual thing. You can see it here. And how this book came to be is the Joseph Campbell Foundation, where Stephanie and I both work, publishes one short MythBlast essay every single week about Campbell's work and some sort of theme of the month that the foundation has. And I've been writing these essays. I've been a contributor to this series for the last few years. And so this book just gathers the essays that I wrote for the foundation from 2020 to 2024. And so, yeah, so there's 14 of these MythBlast essays, and many of them have something to do with how myth and Campbell's ideas show up in my life. And that's really kind of where the practicing enchantment comes in. As I said, enchantment for me has to do with feelings associated with fun, blessing, luck, charm, beauty, awe, wonder, any of the words in this kind of zone. And you'll find essays in this book on four main topics. The topics are tricksters, dreams, goddesses, and family, the enchantments I experience in my own family. I found when I was pulling these essays together and kind of organizing them and writing that introduction that I mentioned, that I kind of found an enchantment credo emerging, like beliefs, personal beliefs about enchantment. These are not like universal laws or anything like that. This is just what I believe enchantment involves. First and foremost, I think enchantment means bringing a little bit of wonder and magic into mundane things. Like I always think of doing the dishes. How can doing the dishes be more magical? I think that enchantment and bliss, an important idea in Campbell's work, I think they're next door neighbors. I don't think they're the same exact thing, but I think they're very closely related. Like when you're practicing enchantment, I wouldn't be surprised if you're also following your bliss. And if you're following your bliss, I wouldn't be surprised if some enchantment happens. I believe that enchantment loves creativity and imagination, as we saw in the chat. And as Stephanie shared with her thoughts about enchantment, I think that the three of them go very well together. I think also enchantment flourishes with learning, courage, and a willingness to change, right? Being willing to take action on behalf of enchantment. And I think enchantment is its own reward. You know, when those moments happen, when those feelings come up and you're in it, there's no wanting anything at that point. You're there, right? So, okay, so with that, I will stop my slide share and I will read to you a little bit from the book. And here we go with the tech again. Okay, Steph, are we ready?
Yes,
Okay.
we're ready.
Okay, so this essay that I'm going to read is called As Beatrice to Dante. This essay is about a dreamlike experience that I never shared with anyone until I wrote about it for the MythBlast series. It would have been too weird, too embarrassing, too wild to speak it out loud in anything resembling normal conversation, but the work of Joseph Campbell and the Wheel of Fortune tarot card created a mythic container that could honor this story's truth. One day, long ago, the ever-spinning wheel of fortune found me sitting at a desk in an open office workspace, my back to a room full of coworkers. Absorbed in a document on my computer, I had just reached an impasse and needed to go ask someone a question. But at that moment, a colleague I hadn't seen for years was striding toward me. He whooshed into the chair beside my desk at the same instant that I whirled around to stand up. Whoosh, whirl, and our faces were way too close together, so close that his leather and sandalwood cologne must have mixed up with my jasmine perfume, and I found myself staring deep into unknown eyes without even seeing the rest of this person's face. But I didn't see his eyes, not really. I saw through them, past them, beyond them, into a midnight blue cosmos where stars explode and nebulae roil with galactic lightning. The whole idea of eyes fell away. I felt like I saw the million invisible dimensions of a soul, its shimmers and flickers spiraling into indigo infinity. "Hello," he said. I jerked back to a decorous distance, stammering, confused. This was a person, a literal, rational, breathing human. And we were at work. I couldn't burst out with an, "Oh my goodness, I saw your soul and it's gorgeous." Instead, I stuck to convention. "Hello." We chatted and caught up, but a part of my awareness remained drunk with awe, high on the vapors of beauty and magnificence. That feeling of altered consciousness lingered for days as I went through the motions of meetings and emails while the wheel of fortune kept turning. That's the wheel's job, after all. It turns, 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 turns. In the tarot deck, the Wheel of Fortune depicts the ongoing roll of the universe. If I didn't know better, I might think this card was a 4 of something. 4 lines forming a compass decorated with 4 Latin letters, 4 alchemical sigils, and 4 Hebrew letters that would spell the name of God if they were all together. In the 4 corners of the card, 4 golden animal powers hover on muscular, beating golden wings in 4 separate clouds while perusing 4 books. But the card shows important 3s too. 3 concentric circles around which 3 cosmic powers ride like a merry-go-round of Egyptian myth. Apopus, the troublemaking serpent, wiggles down into the thick of things. Anubis, the guide of souls, cruises upward and glances outward as though to say, "Buckle up, kiddos, we're going around again." And a wise, regal Queen Sphinx rules over it all from the top of the wheel, unperturbed and unperturbable. Of all the beings on this card, there isn't a single earthbound human. We see gods, forces, symbols, and ideas, but not one mortal. Instead, powers gather here to show the dynamic processes of the cosmos in a productive, creative tension that keeps the wheel turning. At any moment, the card says, big things could happen. But the card shows something else too, something tiny and yet key to the whole image. When I draw a line from the upper left corner to the lower right corner, and then another line from the upper right to the lower left, those lines intersect in the center of the card. What do we find there? The center of the wheel, the hub, the unmoving spot without which the wheel couldn't turn. This is the stillness required for change, the stillness necessary for new life. The new life, Joseph Campbell observes in his book, Mythic Worlds, Modern Words, on the Art of James Joyce, is the life of the awakened spiritual, poetic relationship to the world through the physical realm. Campbell is referring to Dante's Vita Nuova and James Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, both of which blossom forth from an experience of what we might call the center of the wheel, where new life emerges from a revelatory moment of awe. That's where Dante stood when he saw Beatrice, where Stephen Daedalus stood when he saw the young woman at the beach, where I stood, so to speak, that day at the office when I saw the cosmos in a colleague's eyes. Campbell calls this experience, and I'm quoting, a ray of the light of eternity. Once in a while, we inhabit the hub and feel reborn. For Dante and Joyce, the experience inspired singular literature. Quoting again, time and space are gone in the enchantment of the heart, Campbell continues, and I think he's right. The wheel of fortune's compass can guide us through the vicissitudes, but the card's center is the aperture to magic. I never told my coworker what happened that day, but I kept an eye on him for a while in case he turned inside out in a cloud of purple smoke and revealed to everyone the secret that in the center, you fall in love with everything, anything, and most of all, with love itself. And that is a MythBlast essay. So, Steph, I will hand the virtual microphone back to you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Joanna. It's so wonderful to hear your writing in your own voice, and the way you find awe in just the person standing right next to you. It's just beautiful. It's beautiful. Thank you. That was such a gift. Okay, so now is the time for a bit more about the book, and I have some questions for you. So, we've been talking a bit already about enchantment, and I'd love to hear a bit about why. Why enchantment? Why was that the theme? Why the practice of enchantment? Why did that stand out for you?
Great question. I will say, so I titled the book long after most of it was already written. I had been writing these essays for years, not knowing they would end up next to each other in a book. And so I didn't have the practice of enchantment in mind when I was writing most of the book. But then when I found out that they would be coming together in a book, the title arose, the title occurred to me, and I thought of it at first as kind of more of a poetic title, because the essays are about myth and my experience. They're not literally or directly about how to practice enchantment. So I was like, well, let us embark upon a metaphorical practice of enchantment, right, with the title. But then I kind of realized that the essays do contain an implied practice, which is pretty simple. It has two steps. Step one is noticing something that has mythic overtones, something that catches my attention. And then step two is going deeply into that experience through the creative process of mythological writing, right? And in so doing, that kind of amplifies the experience, and it gives me a way to understand it more deeply. So even though I didn't intend really, when the title came up, I didn't intend a literal practice, but I think there is kind of a practice there. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And I'm really drawn to this idea of awareness, how you have to kind of have a keen awareness of what's around you, which to me brings back your idea of stillness. Like there has to be kind of this sense of perceiving the world around you. It requires a little bit of quiet and calm. Uh, yeah, yes, I think that's a really interesting idea. Okay, so I have another question for you. It's a bigger question, but on the back of the book, on the blurb on the back of the book here, there's a statement. And so I'd like to read that out and ask you a bit about that. So it states that mythologist Joanna Gardner has eyes that have learned to see life's experiences, not as threats foreshadowing catastrophe, but rather as trusted friends and teachers. And I can attest to your uncanny ability to see the magic and wisdom in situations that feel deplete of such things. You have done this for me often. You see the world differently in a way that really offers meaning. It's such a gift and a value, and it isn't an easy task. It's certainly something I struggle with. So all of that to say, could you speak to your process of practicing enchantment in the everyday, which you did a little bit earlier, but a little bit more about in a world that feels disenchanted for many, or even what I would consider anti-enchantment? Like that's just absolutely preposterous, this enchantment thing. So wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Another great question. Thank you, Steph. And thank you for your kind words. That means so much to me. Um, and I will say, there is no one answer to any of these questions. Again, it's a super, super personal process and practice. But for me, one thing that I think is super important is trying to sidestep judgment, right? I think of it as cultivating kind of an immunity to approving of things, and to disapproving of things, like avoiding judgments of what's good and what's bad, right? Judgment, I think, involves kind of deciding what to reject and what to cling to. And all of that, the judging, the rejecting, the clinging, it takes a lot of energy that could be used for other things, right? Emotional energy, mental energy, soul energy, that could be used for things like creative work, or reading books about mythology, or writing books about mythology, or being with your people, or meeting new people, right? All the enchanted things. And so what's left when judgment falls away, when you're unburdened by all that approval and disapproval, a lot of times it's wow, like whoa, when you're free of approval and disapproval, there's so much more space for experience. You might find yourself saying, how about that? Or wow, so this is what it feels like to experience whatever. This is what it feels like to wash the dishes, right? Um, and so those moments when I'm able to get outside of judgment, that's when I do my best noticing, right? Step one of my process is noticing the mythic metaphors. And sometimes, when judgment falls away, sometimes what's left is love. Like, I mean, cosmic love, like the kind of love that can hold anything and everything in its embrace, and which I think that's the ultimate enchantment, right?
Mm, absolutely. Love. Yes, absolutely. And this idea of kind of letting go, not in a way of abandonment, but in a conscious way.
Yeah. And I think, can I keep talking a little bit?
Please do. Yeah.
I think it has a lot to do with, how you and I have worked a lot with the idea of yes and, in the Mythologium and other Fates and Graces events, bringing in, holding the multiplicity, holding the great diversity versus kind of the binary of good, bad, right? It just opens up so much more. Good, bad is really a pretty narrow and reductive way to look at things. And so I think like what can follow onto that opening of the space is the ability to actively create enchantment where there wasn't anything before, right? Like throwing a party, starting a conference, things out of the blue. And I think it was Andy in the chat was mentioning that, painting a picture that didn't exist before, actively architecting enchantment into your life and thereby into the world, because your life is part of the world, right? And there's no guarantee that it's going to work ever, but it sure increases the odds of enchantment happening.
Activate creativity.
Creativity, activate.
Wonderful. Okay, well, I'm going to jump to my next question. So, one thing as writers that I know we often do is kind of imagine what our readers will experience when they read our books. So, I'm going to ask you that interesting question on the other side now. Now that your book is out and in the hands of readers, what do you hope the book will offer to them?
It's another great question. And it's interesting too, because part of me, like, I have no idea. I cannot know what anyone is going to experience when they read any of it. So it's a little bit, spine tingling. Like, how is this book going to be received? I don't know. But I do have hopes. I hope that in sharing these experiences, that readers can have a vicarious experience of times that I've experienced enchantment, and maybe get some ideas for practicing in your own way. And hopefully, I hope people who read and are inspired and do some enchantment activism, as I think Craig Chalquist talks about. He talks about enchantivism. But I want to hear people's stories. I want people to share, kind of keep the enchantment wheel rolling. And as it's not a one and done kind of kind of project. It's enchantment can be a way of life, and sometimes you practice better than other times. So just gentleness with the practice, I'll say.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. Yeah, I know I feel inspired for an enchantment glasses on. What do we call them? Myth
There we go.
goggles.
There
I
we
think
go.
it's many times. So yeah, I think it makes for an exciting start to a new year. So a lot of times here on our webinars with our authors, we talk about process because we're about mythological literature and helping people in the community write the ideas they want to write. So you had an interesting process here. It's a compilation of writings, your book that were published previously in blogs for 4 years. So it's kind of going through a span of time that's been somewhat of an interesting span of time. And you pulled all these writings together, you identified themes, you had to revisit where you were when you wrote a lot of these pieces, which is, we had the pandemic and everything. And then all of that to kind of put out this tome of work that you have now. So I would love to hear a bit about how that process was for you. How did that process, if you're willing to share with us, change you? And yeah, a little bit about all of that.
Yeah, it really was interesting, as I was, as you go along and you write a MythBlast, it's a little short essay, you work on it, you submit it, you edit it, it gets published, and then it goes away. You never think about it again, right? And so revisiting this work that I never planned to revisit, it really was kind of like time travel, going back to where I was when I wrote the pieces, and kind of going back to that point. And a lot of the pieces were about things that had happened even before that. So there's like this sense of like layering of time in what I experienced in pulling everything together. And then like kind of taking a step back and looking at the work. Like when I'm writing an essay, I'm like in it. I'm in the paragraphs, I'm in the sentences, it's all right here. And so stepping back and taking a look at a group of them, I was shocked to discover that there are actually themes in my writing and my thinking. I had no idea, right? Every time I wrote a MythBlast, it felt like I, kind of came up with it out of thin air. But I also, in looking at them and in kind of leaning into the idea of the title, the practice of enchantment, I kind of gained some more confidence in my belief in enchantment. I talked about my credo, right? I believe. And the essays taken together, to me, they like functioned as evidence. Like, when you're writing a paper, you need evidence to support your thesis. And so I feel like the essays kind of function as evidence to support the thesis of enchantment. Um, and I will say too, I don't know if I'm the only one who has ever experienced the voice of the inner critic, but it's good. It's a good riposte to the inner critic to say, "Oh yeah, you don't think I'm a writer? Well, look at this. What are you going to do about this?" And so that kind of quiets the inner critic a little bit, I find. So I guess a takeaway that I'll share is, keep plugging away, keep doing the work, and who knows, a book might materialize where you had no idea there would be a book.
Oh, thank you. A couple things stand out for me. I think one is to put the critic in a corner is always a lovely thing. Boy, those critics are not easily quieted. Uh, Two, I think it's just such a testament to how our work stays with us, even when it's outside of our awareness. I think that's such a beautiful witnessing to that process. And then as a reader, it was such a treat to get the little blurbs at the beginning of each of your myth blasts because I felt a little bit like I was in an archive looking back through how writers compose their books and their notes. Like it was like an inside view of like how it was put together and then how your perception was now after all of that. So those were really fun the way you kind of had a conversation with yourself and your own work. So yeah,
I have
thank you.
lots of conversations with myself.
Well, we got to witness it. So that's super fun. Okay, well, we've been chatting for a bit. I have one last question for Joanna. And then, well, I'm going to actually have two, but let me start with this one. Uh, so I've heard you say, and I know many here have heard you say many times that you are a magical realist. It's in your bio. It's always fun to watch people in the audience react to that statement in your bio. So I wondered if you could speak a little bit to what that means, especially in a world that feels disenchanted.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite things to speak to, being a magical realist, right? Like I've loved reading magical realism for a long time. And even beyond just the genre of magical realism, from the time I was little, reading fairy tales, reading novels, the moments when the unreal bursts in to the narrative have always been the moments that to me felt the most real. Like there's more realness somehow in there. And I didn't really, start understanding what was going on there until, we went to graduate school to study mythology. But I believe that reality is magical. And therefore, magic is real. And those moments in literature and myth kind of get at that. And that's what I most love to write about. Like, the first essay in the book, it's called In the Company of Coyote. And it's about an experience that I had of witnessing a small pack of coyotes singing together before dawn, and then watching them as they watched the sunrise together, right? And it was an absolutely magical experience. And it 100% actually happened. It is completely real and completely magical. And so those are the moments that prove to me that we inhabit a magical realm, and give me confidence in saying, I am a magical realist. Magic is there for the experiencing and for the amplifying through creative work. This is another part of my credo. I think that creative work can make the world even more magical than it already is. That kind of like Pan's Labyrinth. Speaking of Pan's Labyrinth, there's another essay about Pan's Labyrinth. But like that movie, the world is a more magical place because that movie exists than the world was before that movie exists, right? That's how creative work can amplify the magic of the world in a very real way. So magical realist, I stand by it.
Yay! I love that idea that reality is magical. That statement. Yeah. Yeah. Uh, so here's to summoning some magical realism in our lives. So thank you, Joanna, so much for all of this. Let's hear some virtual applause in the chat for this conversation we've had thus far, right? And all these valuable ideas about practicing enchantment. And I think now it's time to open up to some comments and some questions from the community. So if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have things that we could discuss some more, please drop them into the Q&A. It's the buttons at the bottom of your screen. You can click on the button, put the comment there, and submit it to us, and we will raise them now. And it looks like we have one here to get us started. So we're both managing this. We're going to have some conversation back and forth here. Let us take a look at these.
I'll look at the chat as well.
Yeah. Take a look at the chat. Um,
I see Catherine. Hi, Catherine. Catherine asks, did you come across Thomas More's Thomas More's book, Reenchantment of Everyday Life, in your research for the book? And interesting, you should ask that question, Catherine. I didn't research this book. I wrote each essay kind of on its own. Well, I'll take that back. I did some research for the introduction having to do with Max Weber and that discussion. I had read Thomas More's book years ago. I mean, years ago, like probably 20 years ago. So, it has informed who I am. And I happen to be rereading it right now because, we're talking Fates and Graces, Stephanie and I, our flag for the year is practicing enchantment. I guess we say our theme, right? We say our theme for the year is practicing enchantment. And so, in all the MythLit webinars that we schedule for the year, we're going to try to bring enchantment in. And if I can put a little bug out to the universe, it'd be awesome to have Thomas More come on to MythLit. So yeah, I'm actually rereading the book right now and enjoying it very much. So yeah, thanks for the question, Catherine. Steph, have you read that one?
I have not yet.
Mm.
No. I do think it's interesting. There's been a fair amount of writing about enchantment,
Yeah.
disenchantment, enchantment, yeah, and it's been a theme for quite some time. I think that's an interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot out there. If you want to find out more about what lots of people have thought about enchantment, there's no shortage.
Yeah.
We should like put together a list of like the enchantment syllabus.
Well, yeah, and your intro to the book itself is a very interesting conversation about disenchantment, right? And re-enchantment and kind of this dialogue between the lack of enchantment and the need for enchantment. I think that's an interesting
Let's
place.
look for more
Yeah, we're still
questions.
looking. Sorry, we're
Any other questions? I mean, we don't have to answer questions. We can wrap it. Oh, wait. No, this isn't a question. Oh, Catherine's iPad says at one point a few minutes ago, Catherine said, sounds like the still point of the turning world. Who's the poet? Is it T.S. Eliot? Good question. If anyone knows who the poet is. Oh, Patricia answered T.S. Eliot. Okay, we're good. We're good. Awesome. Okay. Yeah, I think oh wait, let's look at a little more comments in the chat. How about that, Steph?
yeah, Beth Ann's talking about the gifts of the critic.
Mm.
Yeah, critics are so hard.
Is there a question or what?
Uh, what is the gift of the critic has that is useful to you than asking the critic to stand by until you are ready for its help, if that makes sense, negotiating and transforming. I mean, there's value in the critic.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was being, overly flippant and dismissive of the powers of the critic. The
Oh, no,
critic is
well,
the editor, right? The critic is
right.
cleans everything up. It's just the critic is not allowed to run the show. The critic is not the chairman of the board.
Not in the enchantment space.
No, the heart. The critic is
Yep.
is ideally, helping the heart's work come into the world, I would say.
Hmm. Okay, here's a question from Dennis that I could raise to you.
Sure.
Uh, okay, marvelous presentation, Joanna. Say a bit how you think, let's see, let me say a bit about how you think about what has deleted or sidestepped enchantment. And is there anything that has replaced it? Ooh,
Anything that has like what are the forces that are sidelining enchantment or making enchantment difficult? Is that am I hearing that correctly?
that's how I understand the question. Yes.
Yeah, a bunch of things. Um, Judgments, as I said, I think, getting into binary thinking, like too much into binary thinking can kind of reduce the opportunities for enchantment. Which is not to say that, binaries can't be useful. They can be super, super useful. They just, again, they're not the whole show, like the critic, like opening up to the totality as much as, or opening up to the totality is basically impossible, right? But to more of the totality. So yeah, avoid sidestepping judgments, um, bringing sometimes a playful approach to rules and regulations, I'll say, which, like honoring the spirit of laws more than literal letters of the law sometimes. Um, Over seriousness in any way. I feel like, some gravity is necessary, but so is levity. And there you go. There's another binary, right? Um,
They're
so
hard to let go
yeah,
of.
Steph, what about you? What do you think gets in the way of enchantment?
Well, what came to mind for me was a little bit, I'm just thinking of things that are hits of enchantment, but not depth of enchantment to some degree. I don't know. What comes to mind immediately is an amusement park. Like it may not be a real sense of enchantment, but it's an invitation to go deeper. But there is a deeper sense to enchantment. Like a visit to Disney World may be inspiring, but there's also this deeper sense of enchantment in the soul. And so it's kind of, I was trying to think of hits of enchantment we get that may not give us the depth that enchantment can give.
Well, I'll offer, I know I've said this before. You've all probably heard me say this a dozen times, but I'll quote my beloved poetry teacher from years and years ago, who would say, she said, there's beauty in the depths and there's beauty in the shallows. You know,
Mm,
it's just, it's again, it's pausing and seeing and noticing. So maybe in that sense, back to Dennis's question, one of the enemies of enchantment, or, you know, antagonists of enchantment, is speed, going too fast, doing
yeah,
too much,
absolutely.
not
Yeah.
taking, not slowing down and not experiencing, but just performing, doing, instead of, you know, being sometimes.
Bringing us back to that still point you were talking about, like
Yeah.
that, the magic happens. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, the questions are coming in now. Here,
Mhm.
we've got one from April Heaslip. Hi, April.
Oh, hi, April.
How do you step back into enchantment when you are overwhelmed? Ooh, speaking of
Mhm.
this,
Yeah, you lock the
yeah.
door, you turn off your phone. You have to carve time out, you know. Campbell talks about this in The Power of Myth. You know, the world will overwhelm you if you let it. And
Mm,
it takes active energy to make the space that enchantment requires. Um, yeah, the world will, the world will just plow you right over. And so I'm talking too much. Steph, would you repeat the question again?
yes, let me get back to it here. How do you step back into enchantment when overwhelmed? What are practical steps that you employ?
Practical steps. Yeah. So I use graph paper. I'm a
That's a
big
very
believer in the power of office supplies. If I need to take a step back, graph paper is the tool I use. Like if everything's too much going on, I get a piece of graph paper and a bunch of different colored pens, and I draw out what are all the things? What are all the things that are overwhelming, and where can I find space between them, right? Um, that works for me. Post-its are great. Like I'll like fill the wall with post-its. If there's overwhelm going on, get it out of your head, and then you can step back from it and see it. Again, it's that distancing. It's getting that perspective. And then, you know, you can bring a different kind of wisdom to bear on it, whatever the question is, whatever the problem is, whatever the overwhelm is. But yeah, it takes work for sure. And again, gentleness with yourself as you go about this work. There's no grades here. We're all doing our best, and we're here to help each other.
awesome. Yeah, the brain dump is super helpful
Mm.
that you're talking about. Okay, I have another question
Okay.
from Kate Rittenhouse. Hi,
Oh,
Kate.
hi, Kate.
Could you comment on this Plato quote? That which deceives may be said to enchant. Ooh.
Yeah. So I don't know that passage from Plato. Is it so, Kate, question for you. Is he talking about enchantment in terms of like a lie, an ensorcelment, kind of like Sleeping Beauty being enchanted to sleep for 16 years kind of thing, versus, you know, the fun, the wonder, the awe. Um, how do we hear from Kate? Kate, can you type it into somewhere? I can just keep talking. I mean, there is that aspect, you know. Uh, enchantments Enchantment can reveal the truth, like, and it's kind of like fiction, right? Fiction can reveal a truth, and fiction can lie. And enchantment, or I think of like the enchantments that lie or that hold us back, or kind of undercut us somehow. I think of that as ensorcelment, which I'm using metaphorically. You know, but the metaphor is a wizard somewhere in Middle Earth who's like casting spells, right? And causing harm, causing damage. And so bringing great consciousness to how we practice enchantment and how other people are doing their enchantments around us. Um, you know, setting aside value judgments, you know, goods and bads, and that kind of thinking doesn't mean setting aside discernment. In fact, it opens up more discernment. What is really going on here? And then choosing consciously based on what you see going on. But that's still, you don't have to, you know, identify something as good or bad, or spending time on approval or disapproval. Just seeing, noticing, and responding from a place of conscious discernment. I feel like I wandered a little bit off topic on that. Kate, I
No,
hope that answered your question.
that's great. That's great. No, I think that's great. Sorry, I'm reading through the comments here.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
We have a couple more questions if you're
Okay, let's do
okay.
it.
All right. So we have one from Maggie. Hi, Maggie. What made you think or imagine to reference Max Weber in the introduction of the essay?
Yeah, well, great question, Maggie. I mean, I've come across his quote at least a dozen times about the disenchantment of the world. A lot of times in other books about enchantment, people, refer to this talk that Max Weber gave in, oh heck, what was it? I don't remember the year off the top of my
Long
head, but
time ago.
like 1917 or something,
Yeah,
right?
while ago.
Where he talked about the disenchantment of the world. And so I was like, all right, well, everyone keeps referring to that. What did he actually say? So, I went back and this is where research comes in. I, found the talk that he gave and looked at what the context was and what was going on in the world, what was going on in his life when he said that, and what did he really mean? What was he getting at? And so that's kind of, oh, I did it again. What was the question, Steph?
Why Max Weber and your
Why Max Weber?
introductory
Yeah,
essay?
so I've answered why, and I kind of got into, the what. But yeah, I was interested to, I tell my students that they need to contextualize all the time. So I was like, I need to contextualize this thing.
Yeah, yeah. It's always interesting to introduce a critic into why you're, you know, when you're speaking to something. I think it's a really, it's just a very interesting essay. Okay. We have a couple more questions. We have one here from Johanna. Hi, Johanna.
Hi, Johanna.
It's interesting how science and enchantment have found nexus. It means to mean that the magic of enchantment and the science that explains so much about the reality of the world and universe to give us an understanding of the gifts of actually living and marveling at what we can know as humans. So if you could speak to that.
Absolutely. I agree completely, Johanna. And uh, I think science has this wonderful, like, kind of twofer of wonder. Like scientific breakthroughs are amazing. Like like this is who knew the world worked that way? Oh my goodness, right? That kind of first hit of wonder. But then behind every discovery, there's always this sense of the huge amount of vastness still unknown, which is another hit of wonder. Like wonder, or the wonder and awe are super similar, right? And there's this wonderful book called Awe by this scientist named Dr. Keltner. I see it over there on my table, and he talks about how awe. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. But he talks about how awe involves readjusting your perception of the world to make space for something new and bigger than you had imagined before. So, the first time you see the Alps, you have to readjust your sense of the world to make space for this experience, right? And science does, I feel like, a super similar thing. Both like on both sides of the science coin, so to speak. The discovery itself, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I'm readjusting my sense of how the world works. And wow, look at how much we still don't know, because we know way less than we don't know. We don't know way more than we know is another way of saying that. And both of them are amazing. Both, it's amazing that, here we are, these animals on this planet knowing all this stuff. That alone is astounding. So yeah, I'm having a moment.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, it's enchanting to see some of those visions through the telescopes that we're getting to see now. It's absolutely, I hear you. Okay, more questions. So we have one from Bob. Hi, Bob. How does enchantment relate to moments of synchronicity? Also,
Hmm.
next door neighbors.
Moments of synchronicity. I mean, moments of synchronicity, they're just like in your face enchantment, right? That's just like the world giving you a gift of feeling enchanted. At least that's my experience of those moments. You go, oh, right? Whenever you feel your face making that expression of awe, that's it right there. That's enchantment. So yeah, also next door neighbors. I think that's absolutely accurate.
It is, yes, next door neighbors. They're a very interesting dynamic.
Hmm.
That's fun. All right, I have another question from Caden.
Hi, Kaden. Oh my goodness, it's so fun. Everyone's here. I'm sure together. Okay.
Can enchantment be present in great grief and destruction?
It certainly can. The implied in grief and destruction is great love, right? And it kind of, I'll share in a second. I mean, one of my beliefs about enchantment is that the harder it is to practice, like the more difficult the situation, the more important it is to try, and the greater the potential reward. Some of and again, this is my belief, right? But in my experience, the things that are the most difficult to work with are the ones that yield the greatest wisdom, the greatest compassion, the greatest insight into what other people are suffering as well. I think that's I think compassion is one of the great enchanting gifts of grief and destruction.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'm reading a bit more to see if there's a very rich conversation about Plato.
Oh, good, good, good.
uh, uh, this is Darlena. Hi, Darlena offers
Hey,
a,
Darlena.
it's talking about archetypal Jim Hillman. Um, Helping to resoul the world is the great task of our time. A world which is soulless is one which feels dry and meaningless. Life in it either feels mechanical, rote, full of drudgery, or somehow fake and superficial. And now more than ever, it feels like many people need some help in this process of resouling. Thank you, Joanna, for helping to resoul the world by sharing your practice of enchantment. Oh, yeah.
You're welcome.
I thought there was a question. um, yeah, and then Kate's thanking everyone for helping with the Play-Doh discussion. I'm like, I don't know if I
Hey,
can
it
bring all
takes a
that.
community. This is why we
I
gather.
know. Oh, Ken Burns, Dennis is talking about Ken Burns' four-part documentary on the life and creativity of Leonardo. I
Ooh,
think
yeah, I haven't
we
seen
have
that yet. I want to.
enchantment in a time that reveals how he was led by being enchanted by every particle of the world.
Ooh.
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
everyone, note that recommendation.
Yes, yes. Okay, I think we got the questions. Thank you all so much for all of your questions and patience while I was maneuvering it.
You're doing great. You're doing great.
Okay, no, thank you. We are a two-person team today.
That's
So,
right.
but we have more to share. So I think we're going to wrap up for questions now and start some more here. Hold on, let me get this going. So yes, again, let's first start off with a thank you to Joanna and all of you, the community, for being here and just for all your questions and your participation. And if there's a word or phrase from the conversation today that just stands out for you that you want to carry forward with you, we'd love if you would share that in the chat as well, to share with the community as we all embark on what is going to be an interesting year here in 2025. And then if Joanna, you have shared the slide. Thank you so much. Okay, so here on this slide is a recap of where and how to learn more about Joanna's work and the practice of enchantment. And I'll put all these links in the chat in just a second. But you can buy and read the book anywhere books are sold. It just happens when we checked last night, it was free on Kindle Unlimited right now. So if you have that, check that out as a way to access the book. And Joanna would greatly appreciate it if you would offer a review on Amazon. Reviews support authors. We've talked about that through many of our webinars here. It helps to raise awareness in the algorithms. So that would be really, really helpful for her work. And Joanna has started a Facebook page dedicated to practicing enchantment. And you can join and follow along for tips and ideas and inspiration for an enchanted year. And so I'll drop that link in the chat, as well as subscribing to Joanna's newsletter at her website, joannagardner.com, to receive monthly updates about Joanna's work. All right, so I will share all those in just a moment. Yeah, next up, we are using the publication of Joanna's book to set the tone and the conversations for the year ahead with our MythLit webinars. And our next 3 webinars are scheduled and open for registration. So first up, we have Vanya Leilani and then Maureen Murdoch, and then our very own Maggie Mendenhall. I know you're out there. We're excited to host you as well later this year. So you can learn more about all these webinars, and you can register at our website, faithsandgraces.com. Joanna and I would also like to extend a special thank you to the Faiths and Graces patrons who make it possible for these webinars to not only happen, but also to be free. All Faiths and Graces patrons who support us are invited to our quarterly Zoom check-ins around the solstices and equinoxes, where we catch up on what we're working on and what everybody's reading, which is always an insightful and rich conversation. So if you'd like to join in and support this work, please visit Patreon, and we just thank you so much to all of our patrons. Okay, with that, I'm going to pass the virtual microphone over to Joanna for some final thoughts on enchantment. Joanna?
Thank you, Steph. Yeah, just a few final thoughts, and then I'll close with a final quote from the book, and then that will be our webinar for today. So as I already mentioned a little bit, enchantment is an ongoing practice. There's no certificate of completion. There's no diploma that says you're done. It's an ever unfolding opportunity. So again, going easy on ourselves when we practice, because sometimes it's easier than others. And going back to Caden's question, the harder it is to practice enchantment, I believe the more important it is to try, and the greater the potential rewards. Yeah, we've already kind of covered that. And so there's an infinite number of ways of practicing enchantment, right? Any adverb you can think of is a way of practicing enchantment. You can practice daily, you can practice occasionally, you can practice secretly, you can practice out loud, you can practice alone, you can practice with other people, whatever sounds like fun to you. And so this is the final quote that I'll share, and then we'll leave the webinar open for a few minutes so that you can copy any links out of the chat or finish up any conversations that are going on in the chat. Why not set aside self-doubt and self-consciousness? Why not sing with everything you have and everything you are, as though summoning the sun's fire to earth? Thank you so much, and we hope to see you next month at Vanya Leilani's webinar. Bye-bye.